This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Hello, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and the really bad news about what the hell is going to happen next. And we're in for serious trouble. And the question is, are you prepared for it? And the better question is, how do you prepare for it and how do we get through? How do you get through what's about to happen? Because it's one thing to crash, but can you survive it? So we have a very, very, very great friend. He's an old friend, not that he's old, but we've been friends for over 25 years now. And his name is Richard Duncan. Years and years and years ago, I was in Borders bookstore when there was a Borders bookstore. And I walked past this little counter, this book display, all the different books, the new arrivals. And there was a book called The Dollar Crisis. And the book went, pick me up. And so I said, okay, I'll pick the book up. And I read the book and went, oh my God, this guy is saying exactly what I think. So as you may know, my definition of intelligence is if you agree with me, you're intelligent. So Richard Duncan, so many years ago, was definitely intelligent. And we became close friends. And his other book is called The Corruption of Capitalism. Now, I want you to know, 25 years ago, what Richard was saying was blasphemous. It's treasonous. How dare he talk about that? And the problem is, it's true today. And so his books were prophetic. They were calling what's coming right now. So one of the benefits of having Richard as a friend, he's a classically trained economist, smart guy, really smart because he lives in Thailand, not America. And he's an advisor to some of the biggest funds in the world about what's going on in the macroeconomy. And let me give you the definition, because Rich Dad, we keep things simple. The problem with most people is they're stuck in microeconomy. They don't see the big picture. And I would estimate 90% of Americans just believe that don't worry, America will bounce back. Everything will be happy days are here again. And as a U.S. Marine, we call the people who are stuck in the microeconomy, they got their heads up their asses. They can't even see what's happening in the real world. So our guest today is Richard Duncan, and his book, his service is called Macro Watch. So let me get this between micro and macro. So I'm talking to many real estate agents here in Arizona. They say, oh, don't worry, interest rates are going up and all this stuff, but don't worry, Arizona is hot. That's true, because the people are migrating out of California, Chicago, New York, and now Florida, they're moving here, So Arizona is good. So on the micro scale, these real estate agents are accurate. They're going, yeah, I don't have to worry, man. I live in Arizona. So that's having your head up your ass as far as I'm concerned, because you can't see the macro. And when you look at the macro, the whole world is collapsing around them. And it's going to be good for Arizona, maybe because people will move here and all this stuff. Well, let's say that China whacks Taiwan. Well, that's good for me in Hawaii, because all the Taiwanese will move to either California, Arizona, or Hawaii. So that's micro and macro. So let me give you the definition of micro is you got your head up your ass. You better stand around and take a look at what's going on. So our dear friend, years and years and years and years ago, Richard has been to our events and he's taught, and people always get blown away because they find out how micro they are. So our guest today is Richard Duncan. He's an author and economist. He's the author of The Dollar Crisis, The Corruption of Capitalism, and other books. And he also has a subscription model called Macro Watch. Now, if you want to pull your head out of your butt, subscribe to Macro Watch. And Richard is offering today a 50% discount. Just use the code CRASH, CRASH. Pull your head out of you-know-what. Subscribe to Macro Watch, and you get 50% off. I cannot stress this more importantly, especially today, because, look, we're crashing, like it or not. The question is, how will you survive it? And that's why I'm very happy to welcome Richard Duncan, my friend from Thailand. And He has a macro view of the world where most Americans don't even know where Thailand is. Welcome to the program, Richard.
Robert, thank you so much. It's so great to see you and great to be back on. Thank you for having me.
So my friend, you've been calling this for a long time. The dollar is in crisis, isn't it?
Well, so our economic system is in crisis, and I'm really worried now that we're on the verge of a serious economic crisis that could see the destruction of trillions of dollars of additional wealth before this thing is over.
Yep. And then when you wrote the book, The Corruption of Capitalism, I mean, give me a break. Are we corrupt or what? Has it been corrupted?
So capitalism, in my view, became corrupted at the fundamental level when we stopped backing dollars with gold.
Yes.
And to make a long story, not too complicated a story, but to make a long story short, this unleashed an explosion of credit. Credit absolutely exploded. Total credit or total debt in the United States grew from $1 trillion when I was 3 years old in 1964 to $91 trillion now. From $1 to $91 trillion in my lifetime. And during that process, that created a great deal of wealth, a great deal of economic growth in the United States and all around the world. But our economy became addicted to credit growth. Our economy must have credit growth to stay out of crisis. And now credit is contracting when you adjust it for inflation. So this is a very serious problem for our economic system, which I call creditism rather than capitalism, since it's driven by credit growth.
So that's why your book, The Corruption of Capitalism and the Dollar Crisis, are essential. I mean, they're more timely today than ever before. And once again, the code is CRASH, C-R-A-S-H, get a 50% discount. Because I want you to pull your head out of your butt and take a look at the world, because Richard sits in Thailand. He's an American. He sits out there and he can see the world, but Americans can't see past their house. You know, micro is this: you're standing you're pumping gas into your leased SUV, and you're going, why is the price of oil going up? That's micro. I mean, they can't see it. But inflation, I'm afraid, is systemic now. And a lot of it is because what Richard's talking about is creditism. They just print so much money. Instead of solving the problems, they print money. And now it's going to backfire on everybody. So, Richard, there's a lot of things I want to talk to you about. One is the Nord Stream 2, they torpedoed the pipeline. You have the war in the Ukraine. The English pound crashed. Japan's yen is in serious trouble, and I guess North Korea fired some rocket at the Japanese. You have inflation being systemic, and you have the BRICS, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. I mean, nothing macro here. So you want to take anyone on? First of all, what happened to the English pound? Because that's to me, with the gilts and all that other stuff. Gilts is a government bond or something like that from England. Right.
So that was the second blow we've experienced in the last 2 weeks. What happened there was the new English Prime Minister and her finance minister announced very large tax cuts, very, very large tax cuts, with a lot of this going to the wealthy people, the wealthiest parts of society. And that meant that the UK government was going to have to borrow a great deal of additional money just at the time when the Bank of England, which had been buying government bonds through its quantitative easing program, it was planning to start selling government bonds. So suddenly, England looked like a third world country. Its interest rates on its government bonds doubled in about a 2-week period. They went from 2% on a 10-year government bond yield to 4%. And normally that would make the currency appreciate. But the English pound started dropping like a rock. It fell from 1.15 to the dollar on Monday last week. By Friday morning, it was 1.12. By Friday afternoon, it was 1.09. And on Monday morning, it dropped to 1.03, the lowest in history. And so this huge swings in the currency, and more importantly, in the interest rates on the government bonds, was so violent and so unprecedented that the UK pension funds thought that they had cleverly hedged their positions with these derivatives contracts known as liability-driven investments. But the moves were so large that the people they had these derivative positions, hedging positions with, started calling in their margins, and they couldn't put up their margins. So they got sold out of these hedging positions, and it looked like the entire UK pension system, the various pension funds, were on the brink of going bankrupt.
Collapse.
And so the Bank of England had to jump in, and at the beginning of the week, they intended to start reversing quantitative easing. They were going to do quantitative tightening. But by the end of the week, they reversed course and announced that they were going to do even more quantitative easing. They said they'd buy 65 billion pounds of additional government bonds over the next month or so. And that has restored calm temporarily. And in fact, it's injected a bit of euphoria in all the markets yesterday and today, because the markets and the investors hope that since the Bank of England reversed course and started loosening monetary policy, they hope the Fed is going to do the same thing.
Right.
But it's not.
Yeah, for the Richard, we got to speak English here because these are the Rich Dad audience here. So the point here is this: what does it mean to the English people? Because their pensions were about to collapse, because and the Bank of England is the Fed, the same as our Fed. And so what does that mean? So when they start printing more money, what does that mean? Inflation, or are they trying to avoid a depression? What were they doing?
Well, the first move is to try to avoid a depression. That was what they had to do first. They had to act as a lender of last resort. No one else would provide money to support the financial system in England. And so the Bank of England said, we'll do it. We'll create a bunch of money and we'll restore order. And they did, at least temporarily.
That's been the problem since about 1998 when LTCM, long-term capital management, crashed, and the Fed had to bail out a hedge fund. And Jim Rickards is a friend of ours. He wrote the book Currency Wars and all that. His question was back then, who bails out the Fed? And I think we're kind of there now. I mean, that's what you've been writing about in Dollar Crisis and the Corruption of Capitalism. Who's going to bail out the Bank of England? And who's going to bail out the Fed and all the Bank of Japan and all these central banks?
Well, the central banks have had it very easy for the last 3.5 decades because globalization was extremely deflationary. It was pushing down prices and the inflation rate was very low, so interest rates were very low, so they could get away with printing a whole lot of money without causing high rates of inflation. Right. And by printing a lot of money, they would buy government bonds, and that would finance government spending and let the government spend a lot of money and stimulate the economy that way. So this was a Goldilocks for 3.5 decades. But suddenly now globalization is going at least partially into reverse. Yep. First, we had COVID and the supply chain bottlenecks all around the world. Next thing you know, Russia's invaded Ukraine, pushing up energy prices, oil prices, gas prices, wheat prices, corn prices, another big round of inflation. And suddenly the central banks are in shock because for the first time in 35 years, they have to deal with inflation. And inflation in the UK is at 10%. It's 10% in Germany. It's practically 10% in the United States. And so now, if they try to support the economy by printing more money, that's going to just fan the inflationary flames. But if they don't print more money, then credit's going to contract and the economy is going to spiral into crisis.
Yeah, Richard, we got the message. Okay, so we need to go on. So how, in your book, The Dollar Crisis and Corruption of Capitalism, one more time, please subscribe to Richard's Macro Watch. Pull your head out of your butt, because the English people still have no idea. Most Americans have no idea what happened, and they actually believe the Fed can save them. But as my friend Jim Rickards says, who's going to bail out the Fed? Who's going to bail out the Bank of England? The central bank system is under crisis also right now, and that's what Richard was alluding to 20-something years ago. And so the question is next is, what's happening in China? I mean, they have the biggest bubble in real estate ever, right?
Absolutely, and well beyond real estate. They have excess capacity of everything on a mammoth scale. I once was told by a Chinese professor that in his town, the city government had built 2 beautiful big new bridges. The only thing is they hadn't built the river yet.
So let's move on, because we got so much to cover. We covered English pound. What's going to happen with the Japanese yen, and why is North Korea firing rockets at them?
Well, so I can't talk about what North Korea is doing, but I can say something about what's happening with the yen. The Bank of Japan, the Japanese central bank, is determined to keep their interest rates at a very low level, even though interest rates in the United States and everywhere else, most other countries, are going up very rapidly. And so if the US interest rates are 3.5%, Japanese interest rates are only 0.25%. And the Bank of Japan plans to keep them there. And they can do that. But that means no one's going to want to hold yen, because you can't earn any money if the interest rate's 25 basis points. They want to sell their yen and buy dollars, because the dollar you can get 3.5% interest. So that means the Japanese yen is falling. It's at a 20-year low. And unless the Bank of Japan changes its policy, it looks like it's going to keep falling.
Right. And this is the thing, and I'm fourth generation Japanese American, and I always laugh about it because, so the Japanese per capita have the highest savings rate of all, demographically, the highest savings rate of any population. And that's why the Japanese aren't the smartest. Why would you save money when the governments are printing it? So that's why in Rich Dad Poor Dad I put savers are losers. And now American savers are getting their butts handed to them because they're going to print even more. So the other thing too then is, what do you think about the BRICS? Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. See, Americans can't see the BRICS. It's out of their picture. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And the Belt and Road Project, or the Silk Road Project. What do you think those guys are up to against the dollar?
So they used to all be very strong and moving together, so they could be grouped together under this heading of the BRICS. But now they're all moving in different directions for different reasons. Russia's economy is in serious trouble because of its ill-advised invasion of Ukraine, and it's not doing very well. And they've got lots of sanctions imposed on them. They can't import any high-tech semiconductors, for instance, so they're going to run out of weapons. So their economy is in crisis. And of course, as you know, I believe that 20 years from now, oil's not going to have any value whatsoever. And their economy is entirely fueled by their earnings from oil and gas. So they're looking at a very dire future, in my opinion. China, they have the biggest bubble in history, probably, but since they have a totalitarian government that can make the banks continue lending and continuing to invest, their bubble will probably not collapse into any kind of Great Depression, but it is not at all inconceivable that they'll just stop growing the way Japan stopped growing 20 years ago. And that'll be a huge change for the world, because China's growth has driven the global economy since 2008, when the US stopped playing that role. And so no growth in China is a very big deal. India has better prospects because it's a little more friendly with the United States. And a lot of companies now realize that they'd probably better move their factories out of China, which the United States is becoming increasingly hostile toward, and move it somewhere safer with a lot of low-cost labor like India. So India's prospects are the best among the BRICS, in my opinion.
And let me give one more point out there. For all you guys who are working from home right now, your job replacement lives in India today. Because if you can come in via the computer, and you don't need to go to the office because you don't want to go to the office like many workers don't, then guys like me are going to say, well, why don't I just hire somebody in India? Because that's what technology is doing. So ladies and gentlemen, our guest today is Richard Duncan. He's an author, a longtime friend, economist. He's the author of The Dollar Crisis, Corruption of Capitalism. And he produces a thing called Macro Watch. The great thing about Richard's Macro Watch, he uses pictures for guys like me. And all you have to use the code name CRASH, CRASH, to receive a 50% discount off the price. Because the problem with most people, and I see it every day, micro means that you got your head up your butt and you can't see anything outside of your neighborhood or your gas pump. So please subscribe to MacroWatch and see what's going on throughout the world, and then you may be able to take what we call escape and evasion tactics. You can figure out what you should do in what's going on throughout the world. People cannot see it because it's out of sight. So we come back, we're going more into with Richard Duncan, what's going on in the world of macroeconomics. We'll be right back.
The elite, backed by the accreditation laws, have had access to all the early investment opportunities. They have had the opportunity to invest in tech companies in the private markets before dumping their winners into the public markets for huge gains. But now you can take back your power. Introducing the ChainRaise platform, the platform built for the people, by the people. On ChainRaise, you will find blockchain companies, tech startups, real estate deals, and more that you can invest in. Anyone 18 and over across the world can create a diversified portfolio with under $1,000. Go hunting for the next tech unicorn or look for cash flow opportunities all through one platform. Join us in taking back your power. Go to chainraise.io today.
Hey everyone, it's Sarah at the Rich Dad Radio Show. Let me tell you, good sleep is the ultimate game changer, and the 8 Sleep Pod is the ultimate sleep machine. I live in Arizona. It's over 100 degrees today, and it's only expected to get hotter throughout the week. And the pod is the only sleep technology that dynamically cools and heats each side of the bed to maintain the optimal sleeping temperature for what your body needs. With the pod, you can start sleeping as cool as 55 degrees Fahrenheit or as hot as 110 degrees Fahrenheit. And clinical data shows that 8 Sleep users experience up to 19% increase in recovery, up to 32% improvement in sleep quality, and up to 34% more deep sleep. And 8 Sleep recently just launched the next generation of the pod. The new Pod 3 enables more accurate sleep and health tracking with double the amount of sensors, delivering you the best sleep experience on Earth. And all you need to do is go to 8sleep.com/richdad to start sleeping cool this summer and save up to $150 on the pod. 8 Sleep currently ships within the USA, Canada, the UK, select countries in the EU, and Australia.
Feeling powerless over current events and your financial future? Financial freedom is your freedom. Robert Kiyosaki is the best-selling author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Over 40 million people have taken Robert's advice. Now it's your turn. Attend Robert's free virtual wealth building event. Claim your free access now at richdadfree.com. Don't wait, access is limited. Go to richdadfree.com. That's richdadfree.com.
Welcome back. Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. And today could be bad news or good news, depending on how you look at it. Because I think, if you're prepared for what's about to happen or what is happening today, it's good news. But if you're not prepared, you're going to get your butt handed to you. And our guest today is Richard Duncan. He's a longtime friend, 20-something years now. His 2 books are The Dollar Crisis, The Corruption of Capitalism, and he offers a subscription to his very important site called MacroWatch, and he's offering a 50% discount. All you use code name CRASH, CRASH. The reason this is important, because we're crashing, like it or not. I'm a Marine pilot. I went down 3 times. And the question is not if you're going to crash. The question is, will you survive the crash? And that's what I love about the Marine Corps. We practice crashing every single day. And so when the 3 times it happened in Vietnam, we survived. So the reason I suggest you subscribe to MacroWatch and get a 50% discount is because the question is not the question, are we going to crash? We are crashing. Question, are you going to survive? And you can subscribe to MacroWatch by going to Richard Duncan Economics. RichardDuncanEconomics.com. And I said, micro is you got your head up your butt, and that's where most Americans are. Where people I meet, oh, don't worry, the Fed's got my back. The Fed will save the stock market. Oh, don't worry, my pension is safe and all this. But if you've read most of my books, like Who Stole My Pension and Prophecy and all that stuff, this is this book here, Rich Dad's Prophecy, and it says why the biggest stock market crash in history is still coming. Well, it's here, sports fans. I published this book in 2013 just to have an artifact to prove I knew what I was talking about, but how you can prepare yourself and profit from it. So today, I'm making more money hand over fist, but unfortunately the rest of the world's going broke. I went to school, my background is oil. I drove oil tankers for Standard Oil. And so today I own oil wells. I don't own oil stocks. And when Biden cut off the Keystone XL pipeline in 2000, the first act he did was an act of sabotage, but Biden did, in my opinion. I was selling oil at $30 a barrel. Immediately when he cut that off, it went to $130 a barrel. Meanwhile, the middle class and poor got poorer, and guys like me got richer. And that's what I mean about Rich Dad's Prophecy. If you prepare, you'll come out okay. But you got your micro watch and you got your head up your butt thinking, the Fed's going to save me. America's the greatest. I don't have to worry. I got a pension. I got a 401k. I'll take laps around the rosary beads tonight. So our guest today is Richard Duncan. He lives in Thailand. He's an American, classically trained economist, unlike me. And he sits outside. So we're going to ask his opinions. There was, just as Biden cut off the Keystone XL pipeline, which ran from Canada to America, recently the Nord Stream 2, the pipeline running out of Russia, was torpedoed, was bombed, and it's in 200 feet of water. I mean, the charge to blow that thing up. I mean, God, I'm a Marine, I fought and all this stuff, but I wouldn't know how to blow up a pipeline, that is really, really big. But the question is, what does it mean? And Richard has some opinions on it, and I remind you, it's just an opinion. But what's the significance, like Biden cutting off the Keystone XL pipeline in America, which is an act of terrorism and treason, in my opinion, and then the Nord Stream 2 pipeline gets demolished intentionally. And it's Russia's major source of income is exporting power or energy. So Richard, what is your opinion, and I use that key word opinion, what is the significance of Nord Stream 2 being torpedoed, or satchel charge in the Marine Corps term?
Right. So, there's no hard evidence about who did it. So this is purely speculation on my part. But if I had to guess, I believe that Russia blew them up. It was not just Nord Stream 2, which hasn't begun operating yet. It was also Nord Stream 1. Both of them got blown up at the same day, nearly the same time. So Nord Stream 2 hadn't started pumping any gas yet, but Nord Stream 1 had been pumping gas for a very long time, until recently. Putin stopped all the gas going through Nord Stream 1. So there was no gas going to Europe from Russia through Nord Stream 1 or Nord Stream 2. And the day that they blew up was the day or the day before that a new pipeline opened between Norway and Germany that's going to supply a great deal of gas from Norway to Europe this winter. And I believe that by blowing up these pipelines, which were doing Russia no good anyway because they weren't pumping any gas anymore, he was sending a signal that he could blow up the Norwegian pipeline to Germany as well. And if he did that, then it will be a very cold winter for the Europeans, and they won't be able to run their factories. And so their economy will have a very severe crisis. So that seems to be the message he was sending. Of course, he's also threatening to use nuclear weapons, which is the most frightening statements I've seen coming out of any world leader since I was a child.
Right. We're back. And another question, because you live in Thailand, and I'm kind of American, and China's in trouble. I mean, historically, every time there's inflation, despots rise, like Stalin and Hitler and Mao and all those guys rise out of, hyperinflation and things like this. If China's in trouble and, Russia hit Ukraine, from an American's point of view, sitting in Thailand, what are the odds of China going after Taiwan? Your opinion.
It's a possibility, but
it's a possibility. It's a possibility. I'll be 6'5" next week, but
it probably won't happen because it would lead to a war between the United States and China, and at the very least, it would result in an economic calamity in China because China's trade surplus with the United States, the amount of goods China sells to the U.S. over and above the amount the U.S. sells to China, is more than $1 billion every day, more than $400 billion a year. So right away...
How much a day?
$1 billion a day.
That's the trade coming back and forth between China and America? China to America?
That's China's trade surplus. That's how much profit they make every day. More than $400 billion a year that they would lose overnight and never to recover if they invade Taiwan. So that's a very big incentive for them not to do it because unemployment would go up. It would cause social instability. They'd also end up having some of their cities wrecked and the Communist Party might be overthrown. So that's probably the biggest reason they're not going to do it this decade.
And the reason I asked that question was to set up your book, The Dollar Crisis and Corruption of Capitalism. One of the things you said, in the dollar crisis was after Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard in 1971, which was the corruption of capitalism, because you could print money to pay bills, the US dollar. What you said was that the reason there wasn't inflation was because China was producing so much. They could send goods over to America, like even our pharmaceuticals, at such low prices that Americans didn't feel the inflation. Once again, it's the high productivity of the Chinese people that kept inflation low in America since 1971. Anything you want to say about that?
And their very low wages. Of course, when this started in magnitude or in quantity around 1990, the Chinese factory workers, when I first saw the Chinese factory, it was 1989. And it was full of 19-year-old women earning $5 a day. And there were factories like that even then, 30 plus years ago, as far as the eye could see in all directions, full of people working for $5 a day. And that was the main source of global deflation and disinflation that brought the interest rates in the US down from interest rates and inflation, in 1980 were double digit. In early 2015, they were practically negative.
But it also meant the export of jobs to China. Is that correct?
That's right.
And that's why, look, I'm going to say this one more time, and I'll keep saying it. Subscribe to MacroWatch. Code name, or the code is CRASH, CRASH. 50% discount to Rich Dad Radio. And go to richardduncaneconomics.com because micro is where most, I would say 90% of the people are. And a Marine would say micro means you got your head up your butt. But you better start taking a look at what's going on throughout the world right now. Because like when I was talking to real estate agents, they're going, I don't have to worry. Arizona's hot. Well, good, because people are migrating here. But where they're migrating from is another issue, and what's happening to interest rates. So, Richard, this is a big question today. What do you think is going to happen to interest rates? This guy, you talk about this guy, Jay Powell, he has to stop inflation because inflation is now systemic. It means it's now going to keep going. And the more inflation runs, it's like the person standing at the pump with the gas, pumping gas into their leased SUV, worried about their job and the price of oil is going up. They're micro. They cannot see past their butt. So can Powell, Jay Powell is the head of the Fed, U.S. Fed, can he stop inflation?
Well, he can if he increases interest rates high enough. And all hell broke out 2 weeks ago when Powell put out the Fed's new projections for how high they would increase interest rates. In June, they said that interest rates would be 3.4% at the end of this year. 3 months later, in September, 2 weeks ago, they said they're going to be not 3.4%, but 4.4%. And by the end of next year, he said they'll be 4.6%. So this was a radical adjustment upward in their projections for how high they're going to increase interest rates just over the next few months. And afterwards, that caused a big sell-off in the stock market. The dollar got a lot stronger. That caused problems for the UK pound, and all hell broke loose in the financial markets. And on top of that, not only are they hiking interest rates, but at the same time, they're reversing quantitative easing. Instead of creating money, they're now destroying $95 billion every month.
This is the U.S. Fed. This is the U.S. Fed's doing this.
That's right. The Fed is destroying $95 billion a month. Multiply that times 12 months, and that's going to be $1.1 trillion that don't exist 1 year from now that exist today. That's about 13% of all the dollars. As long as the Fed is carrying out quantitative tightening or destroying dollars like that, it's very likely that asset prices are going to keep falling, because all of the asset prices are floating on this ocean of liquidity that the Fed is now draining. So it's like a bathtub. The bathtub is being drained of water, and all the asset prices are going down. It's not going to stop until the Fed stops.
So let me explain what that means to Mrs. Micro. That means that their real estate is going to come down because there's fewer buyers. I was at a major bank yesterday. The bank was empty. You know why it was empty? Because they don't need loan officers. The biggest layoffs are coming in the banks right now because banks cannot loan money because people cannot afford to borrow. That was just yesterday. So that's micro. And so that's why we have Richard Duncan. Go to Richard Duncan Economics, code name CRASH, CRASA. Subscribe for 50% off for his program Macro Watch. Richard, you know, we could go on forever and ever and ever, and I've kind of led the agenda. Anything you'd like to say to the listeners of Rich Dad Radio and how to prepare for the crash?
So, since the Fed is draining this liquidity on such an aggressive scale and hiking interest rates, the 30-year fixed mortgage rate is now moved up to 6.7%. All of the asset classes are likely to fall together. In the past, it didn't work like that. Stocks would go up and bonds would go down and vice versa. But today, they all move up and down together because they're all floating on this ocean of liquidity that the Fed is now draining. So as long as the Fed keeps draining liquidity through quantitative tightening, all of the asset classes are likely to fall together. So I saw in the Wall Street Journal today, one pundit advised his clients to resort to prayer. That may not be bad advice, at least for investors. Or being more practical, times like these are not times to look to make a great deal of money. This might be a good time to start thinking about improving your business, creating your own business, getting into business for yourself, something you can control, building up your own business, and worrying less about speculating in speculative assets in the hope that they'll go higher in the near term, because they're probably going lower.
So
there will be a day when things turn around. Last year, I was very bullish on the stock market because the Fed was creating $120 billion every month and pumping it into the markets. And as long as that carried on, it was clear asset prices would probably keep moving higher. At least I thought so. But now the reverse is happening. So it's not at all surprising that the stock markets are down between 20 and 30% so far this year. They probably have significantly further to fall. Property prices are probably going to start falling at a double-digit rate by the middle of next year. And things are not going to turn around for a while.
And the reason that's important is because, I said in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, your house is not an asset. That was 25 years ago this year. And for many of the middle class, or the boomers of my generation, their house is their biggest asset they have. And I said, it's not. And today they're crashing. And their housing price, their 401k is probably crashing. And how does quantitative tightening or stopping printing money affect bonds? Because bond markets are the biggest markets around.
Right. So if they just stop printing, then things would more or less be level. But they not only stop printing, but they're actually destroying money now. Instead of printing money, you can say they're unprinting money at the rate of $95 billion a month. And when they do that, what they do is they have these bonds that the government has issued. When they mature, the Fed takes the money from the government. And then the government has to get money from somewhere else, from the public. And that reduces the amount of money that exists in the economy. So with less money, that pushes up interest rates. That makes the bond prices go down and the interest rates, the bond yields go up. So quantitative tightening is another way of tightening monetary policy and pushing up interest rates and making it more expensive for people to borrow and consume or borrow and invest.
So let me keep it really simple. If I have a bond that was paying 5%, but the new bond is 8%, what does that do for the value of the bond? The old bond.
Right, so it pushes it down.
Right.
Because no one is going to want to own the bond that's yielding 5% if the new bonds they can buy yielding 8%. So it causes the price of the old bond to fall until its equivalent yield comes into line. If it falls enough, then the yield would be 8% on that bond as well.
And see, let me explain why what Richard is saying is so important. Is because Wall Street for years has been selling 60-40, 60% equity, 40% bonds, and they're all dropping. It's all dropping right now. So that's the reason I suggest, again, codename Crash. RichardDuncanEconomics.com, 50% discount to MacroWatch. Pull your heads out of your butt because you're just getting this now, and there's a lot more to gain because I've known Richard for over 25 years, and this is all we talk about. We could see this coming. And his two books are Author of the Dollar Crisis and Corruption of Capitalism. So Richard, I want to thank you for your contribution to me personally, because your guidance is, your wisdom is, I'm going to get richer in this crash, which I am happy about, but I'm concerned about my fellow human beings who got their heads up the butt. So Richard, thank you very much.
Well, Robert, thank you very much for having me on, and thank you for recommending MacroWatch. It's a video newsletter that comes out every couple of weeks, explaining something important happening in the global economy and how that's going to impact asset prices, stocks, bonds, commodities, currencies, etc. So I hope your listeners will check it out at RichardDuncanEconomics.com.
And the reason I like MacroWatch, I use pictures because I like pictures better than words. Okay. So I thank you.
100 hours of videos now in the MacroWatch archives that are available immediately upon subscription.
Okay, well, thank you. And so, Richard, thank you. And we come back, we'll give a final word, the wrap up on what does it mean to you. We'll be right back. Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. And special thanks to our guest. Richard Duncan is a longtime friend of ours. And again, his books are The Dollar Crisis, Corruption of Capitalism, and his subscription model is called MacroWatch. And it's a 50% discount to Rich Dad radio subscribers. And the code name is Crash. Go to Richard Duncan Economics. And FYI, we take nothing from that. A lot of these guys work for tips and they want a percentage of what Richard says. We don't do that. We don't need the money because the information Richard has is more important than a 10% tip, commission from whatever we sell him. So we charge no money. At the same time, we don't recommend what he says. Our job is to give you information, knowledge, and then you make up your own mind. So again, we take nothing from that because we don't need to, because what Richard provides is knowledge and information and wisdom, and a macro view of the world economy is priceless. So all these guys who are cheapskates, they want to work for tips, give me a commission. We don't do that, do we, Sarah?
No.
So again, use his work as your caution. Because we at Rich Dad believe in financial education, not financial advice. It's a very big difference. So one more thing, you can listen to Rich Dad Radio anytime, anywhere on iTunes, Android, or YouTube. And I suggest this podcast and all podcasts, get together with friends and family and listen to it, discuss it, figure out what's going on. So you can listen to this podcast at richdadradio.com. richdadradio.com, get to friends, family, and tell them to pull their heads out of their butts and start to figure out what's going on in the macro world and get out of the micro world. So Sarah, any comments, anything, what'd you pick up?
So two things. First, I don't know if anybody else caught on to this when he was talking about the Fed draining the liquidity out of these propped up assets.
It's
right?
quantitative tightening.
Correct. So in my mind, and this is just a tip for our listeners, this is what I see, and probably most parents can relate. But if you see a bathtub and all the toys kind of floating on top, the yellow rubber duckies, that's what's been happening, right? And now that the Fed is doing quantitative tightening, it's slowly draining all of that water out of the tub, and pretty soon those toys are just going to be sitting at the bottom of the tub with no water in it. So I thought that was a great kind of visual he talked about. The second thing, we touched on China and production. And we've learned in the past that inflation is always an increase in money supply and no production.
Right.
And
or
so
a decrease in production.
And so that's what world we're living in right now.
Correct. And it's a macro world. And it's a very dangerous world right now. And the reason I mention all this is, 25 years ago when I read The Dollar Crisis, like I was walking in Borders bookstore and said, pick me up. And then Rich and I became good friends because, definition of intelligence, if you agree with me, you're intelligent. And then he came up with the corruption of capitalism, which I agree with because 1972, I was flying in Vietnam as a Marine pilot, and I went behind enemy lines to buy gold. And today I own gold mines, silver mines. I own real oil. I don't have oil stocks. I own cattle. I own everything the Fed cannot print. So remember, when they say Bank of England and they say the Fed, they're the same things. And the English pound nearly took it. And the reason they had to start printing again, which is causing more inflation for the English people, is that the pensions are going to collapse. The same thing is going to happen to America because it's already happened. People don't know that. That's who wrote the book, Who Stole My Pension, by myself and Ted Siddell, who's also going to be on one of the Rich Dad radio podcasts. So ladies and gentlemen, this is the most dangerous time in world history, but let me give you some bright news. In the Marine Corps, before I went to Vietnam, I was stationed at Camp Pendleton, where we're in advanced weapons, guns and rockets, machine guns and all this stuff. We had to practice crashing 3 times a day. Now, crashing an empty helicopter is different than crashing a helicopter with guns, rockets, machine guns, and ammunition on board. But we practiced, and we practiced, and we practiced. So when it came 3 times in Vietnam, because the odds were, my life expectancy as a Marine pilot, gunship pilot, was 30 days. We didn't live very long. So if we practiced crashing, we had a chance of surviving. So I went down 3 times, and my crew and I came back home back in January 10th, 1973, only to get spit on and hit by eggs by little commie pinkle hippies from the Woodstock generation. Here we are today. And there's no financial education in our schools. So that's why I listen to people like Richard Duncan, who sits in Thailand. He's American, and he can see the world, and that's his job, is macro. Most important thing you can do right now. Final words of Sarah.
Final words is always a wealth of knowledge. We'll put the link to his website in the description. But like you always say, listen to the show 2 or 3 times because you'll pick up something new each time.
And discuss it.
And if you want to hear something interesting to go back and study, I made a note of it. We talked about BRICS with the Andy Schechtman video that we had published a couple weeks ago. He made a case for opposite of BRICS nations growing in strength. And if you listen, he goes through, what's happening in Russia, what's happening in India and China. So it's kind of cool to see both sides of the coin.
Well, the world is crashing. I don't know if people understand that because in 1971, Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. 1944, during the Bretton Woods Agreement, the dollar became the reserve currency of the world, but we made a promise to the world that the U.S. dollar would be as good as gold. The trouble is, as Andy Schechtman talks about in all this, is that we started fighting the war in Vietnam and the war on poverty in America, socialism. And we didn't have enough money. So we broke the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1971. Nixon took us off the gold standard, and that was the corruption of capitalism. They could print money rather than make work for money. So ladies and gentlemen, we're screwed. Prepare for the crash, and thank you for listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show. And remember, micro means pull your head out of your butt. Thank you for listening to Rich Dad Radio.
Thank you.